Hello, welcome to Balisong Meet the Makers. I'm your host Chell Wong, and today we have Garrett from NRB. Now, if you're watching this video, you might just be seeing my face. Unfortunately, Garrett does not have a webcam. But if you haven't heard of NRB, or maybe you have, NRB is known for being the maker of both aluminum and titanium knives and trainers and live blades, including the Slight, the Koenig, and the Ultralight, as well as other Balisongs such as the Nemesis and the Vortex. So, Garrett, thank you for coming on. How are you doing?
Absolutely. I'm doing pretty great. How about you?
I am all right, though I hate narcolepsy. I was just asleep all day. But I guess enough of that. I have been dying to ask this question. I always like to know how people got their names because I don't know, sometimes people have funny names. Like last time I asked Zippy how he got his name and he told me it had to do with the zipper. How did you get the name I am not a real boy? Because as a trans person myself, I was like, is this a trans thing? I don't know because I didn't know you before.
No, so honestly the story is pretty uneventful and unexciting. I was 14 when I made my Reddit account with that username. I thought it was edgy and it just kind of stuck. Like it's really stupid. There's literally zero meaning behind it. It's just something I thought was edgy like 10 years ago, and that's just what I got known as.
That's hilarious. And then I guess you just shortened it to NRB.
Yeah,
Opposed
I
to
mean, my accounts still go by I'm not a real boy, but for the most part, the last few years I've just been called NRB. I don't even know who started that. It wasn't me. It was a few community members, and that
Interesting.
just kind of stuck.
So I know that also, you know, your logo is like three dots over a line. I'm
Correct.
pulling it up to the camera to show. Where did that come from? And does that have anything to do with your name?
No, so it doesn't have anything to do with the name. When I was designing my first Balisong, I was struggling to create a logo, and I decided on what is a minimalistic crown.
A minimalistic crown. Okay. Oh, it's a crown.
Yeah, I don't think too many people know that that's what it is, but that's what I intended it to be anyway.
Huh. I think it's really cute and I like it.
Oh yeah.
It's like simplistic, and then I, as you know, an enthusiast in the community, I'm like, it's a nice logo. It's easy to draw. Also, it's really easy to ink. I've inked my my Ultralights logo here. But a crown. And so, speaking of crown, I know that you spoiled me on this, but the Koenig means king, but the Koenig's not your first Balisong, right?
Correct.
So what is the first Balisong that you made?
Okay, so the first Balisong I made, I forget whether it was late 2017 or early 2018. It was called the Douche, the Doosh. At the time, there was a community member named Nardath who was not a big fan of me. He did not like me, and he made a rant video, and he called me, I am not a real boy, a douche modder at the time.
Oh my
And
God.
so it was just kind of a slap in the face. I just want to do something funny because, like, when I first made that knife, I never intended this to turn into a career of mine. It was just something I wanted to do for fun. So, yeah, my first design was called the Douche.
I have never heard of that before or seen it. How'd you get into making that? Because like making a Balisong is not easy, as I'm sure you of all people know.
Yeah.
How'd you get into making the Douche, and how did that eventually lead to making really fucking good Balisongs, in my opinion?
Okay, so at the time when I joined the community, it was late 2016, early 2017. There were very few competitive flippers. There was mainly just the Replicant, the Alpha Beast, the 42, which was few and far between. They were pretty rare, pretty expensive at the time, and then the 51. I'm sure there's a few others I'm forgetting, but those were like the staples of the community. So, oh, there's also Hom. I forgot about that. Hom at the time was one of my favorite makers. He was absolutely the highest quality Balisong manufacturer on the market. But they were a bit steep in the price for, a broke 17-year-old. So I wanted to create something that was up there with the big boys and had a relatively inexpensive and entry-level price point.
So how did you first make your first ever Balisong? Like, did you make it by hand? Did you have like aluminum stock?
No, so I have one of my friends, Nolan from NoloB. He taught me the very basics of 3D modeling, and I just kind of threw together some 3D models one day.
Okay.
Sent those off to a few different shops, found a manufacturer that was decently priced and relatively consistent in terms of quality. And I sent them all the files. 3 months later, I had a prototype in hand, and it was not very good, but that started everything.
What was after that? Like, I assume that sparked something to be able to be like, oh, like, I don't know, you made something. And what
Yes.
was next after that?
So after that came the trap code. Originally, it didn't look the early prototype did not look anything like the production models. A lot of people said it looked too much like the EX10 or
Oh, yeah,
EX9.
by Jeff Dumas.
Yes, yes.
So,
But a lot of people said it looked too much like the EX series, so I completely redesigned the entire knife. The only thing that stayed the same was the handle shape and geometry, and the name. But other than that, it was a completely different knife. It was a sandwich titanium knife with floating spacers, and I think I did D2 for the blade steel.
okay.
So that was the second knife.
So what's after that? Because, I mean, again, I own 3 of your knives. I've listed 2 others. I know of also the Outcast. I didn't even know about the trap code either.
Okay. So yeah, the trap code was my second knife. After that, I used the profits from that to make the Outcast, which was a revision of the original douche design, which was far more refined, because the douche, most people's first knives aren't very good. That was the case for me, at least.
Sure.
So I wanted to refine the design with the stuff I'd learned over the past year and a half, 2 years, and I made a few changes to the design. It's very similar in design, like the blade profile stayed the same. But a few design elements on the handle and the Zen pin geometry changed. Overall, it just became a bit more refined. It's still nowhere near as good as what I'm capable of making today, since, that design was 2018. But yeah, the Outcast was the third knife.
All right. At this point, were you like already sort of like taking this as a career?
So at that point, yeah. The Outcast was a batch of something like 130. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was a lot for me at the time. I had some help from my brother and my dad with assembly and tuning and all that. After the Outcast, I believe it was the Vortex. I think so, anyway.
And you lent me your Vortex V3, which I've covered on my videos, and it's a really solid flipper. It's like very neutral, really lightweight. And the V3 also has like face texture, but I know the first 2 versions don't.
Yeah. So the V1, I wanted something that was very, very entry level, but did not lack in quality. So the first batch of Vortex V1s, they sold for 125. They were 6061 with a 440C blade. So after the V1 came the V1.5, which was an accident. It was the same exact design. I changed absolutely nothing, but instead of 6061, I accidentally ordered it in 7075, which made the knife feel and sound so much better. And it wasn't that much more expensive, so I decided to just run with it and make the Vortex and all future revisions 7075 as well.
So, just to double check, the douche you said was titanium sandwich?
The douche was aluminum sandwich.
Aluminum sandwich, okay. And then the Outcast was channel aluminum?
The Outcast was also sandwich aluminum. My first few
okay.
designs were sandwich, and then I learned eventually that channel was my preference.
So and so by the time you got to the Vortex, that's your first channel one?
Yes.
Okay. So what was after the Vortex?
So after the Vortex came the Nemesis V1, which was my first channel tie knife.
I've not tried a V1, but I have tried a V2, and now you're on a V3 as well, which
Correct.
here is you said it was like more neutral too?
It's a bit more neutral than the V1 was. The V1 was pretty handle biased. Not as bad as something like a 62, but it had more handle bias than I wanted it to have, because I was still learning, like, in CAD, you can check the center of gravity of your assemblies, and I was still learning what the center of gravity translated to in terms of balance.
Right, yeah.
So I thought I was close to what I wanted, but I really wasn't. I still like the V1 Nemesis. I mean, it holds a special place in my heart, being my first channel tie knife. I think it came out pretty good for the time, but it has definitely improved as time went on.
And I like, I don't know what year this was, because I've not been in the Balisong community as long. And the fact that like only like, oh god, at this point it's been like I think 2017, like that wasn't that long ago, and it's been like 8 years, or 7 years I should say.
Yeah.
I can math. But like, if in 2017, the 42 and the rep and the chat, or like the Alpha Beast, were like the main flippers at the time. Obviously, like the Balisong community has grown so much, and also in that era, handle bias and rollovers, right, were like a lot more of the thing. I don't even know if rollovers were even a thing at that time.
Oh, they definitely were. But
Okay.
definitely the community's preference was handle bias at the time. It's
Yeah.
slowly grown to liking more and more neutral knives. I mean, everyone is going to have their own preference, but I'd say modern Balisongs are far more neutral than older, like 7 to 8-year-old Balisongs were.
Yeah, I definitely prefer neutral. Like I like neutral and lightweight, and that's I guess maybe a testament to me being like a newer flipper opposed to some people who are like who've been in for a lot longer that prefer like heavier, more handle bias knives. So I guess after the Nemesis, what was after that?
I want to say it was the V1 Koenig after the Nemesis.
The Koenig. Did that have texture on the V1 version, or that no? That wasn't until V2, right?
Correct. So the V1 was untextured. It implemented a new weight system that was developed in collaboration with Glider Co., where it used a set screw at the very base of the handles, right there.
Yeah.
So that was new at the time. It was one of the first knives on the market to have a very easy to change weight system. Because
I
like
love
weight
this weight
systems have
system.
existed prior, but you have to take the knife apart. So I wanted something where you could easily change the balance to fit your personal preference without having to take the entire knife apart and break its tune.
Yep. So as you can see on video right now, I have just taken out, I believe, a medium weight screw. I think your newer versions of the Koenig use, was it different materials or is it different lengths? Because I have different lengths.
The screws?
Yes.
So every single Koenig's shipped with 3 different sizes of set screws. They
Okay.
stayed the same from the V1 to the V2, though.
Gotcha. So I currently have, I think, like the medium length ones. I swear I have like 4. I don't know. Maybe it's just 3. But yeah, as you can see, you just have these screws and you just tighten them all the way in and out, and it's really easy and fast to put them in. That said, like if you're doing with your hands, it is possible to put it in backwards, and if you do that, then it can get stuck. So
Oh yeah,
uh,
don't do that.
don't do that. As I have mentioned before, it is not idiot proof, and I am so sorry if I've called any of you an idiot, but I feel like I have almost done an idiot move myself. But the Koenig is really cool. I have a V1 Koenig right here, albeit with a ROTB reblade, and I think this weight system is pretty ingenious. And I had no idea it was with in conjunction in collaboration with Glider Co.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I also love how not to get off topic, but the Glider Co. Titanium Antarctic has one of my favorite weight systems, which is like a spacer that's like a revolver chamber, and it's like you don't have to take it apart too much. You just have to take apart the spacer on the bottom. But that said, like I love weight systems, and like I guess how did you come up with this? Or you said you wanted to make sure that you could make one without disassembling, but how'd you come up with like bottom of the screw kind of thing?
So originally, I intended to have a pivot at the base of the handles, kind of like most modernized, like Machinewise stuff has the pivot at the base of the handle. And I wanted that to run through the channel and have different size removable weights that sat in the channel, but it just required too much manufacturing because every single one of
Gotcha.
those weights needed to be custom machined.
Oh
So
yeah.
to keep costs down, we just decided to go with a set screw. It's very easy,
makes
very
sense.
simple, easy to machine, and cheap enough to keep the price point down.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty reasonable hardware system in the sense of like screws are screws, right? Like
Yeah,
I
it's
think
easy.
that yeah, exactly. And I know that also like on the A51 Phobos, the weight system is just Zen pins are the screws, and I think I've seen other things that were like that too. Which is also like oh, it's just a little tiny tube. Um, so Koenig. I mean, at this point, I know the Koenig very well, and I think it's a really sweet knife. What happens next? Did you do the ultralight next?
So after the Koenig, I believe it was on to the V2 prototypes of the Vortex and the Nemesis.
Gotcha.
Most people know those had tolerance issues with the channels. They
Mm.
were far larger than intended. They were extremely out of spec. So I used what I learned from those with the tolerance issues to switch to the keyway cut channels that you see on all of my newer stuff. So the Nemesis V2 has keyway cut channels. The Vortex V3 and Nemesis V3 also have keyway cut channels.
Do you mind explaining what a keyway cut channel is?
Okay, so for a conventional channel, at least what I used to do was you would have the handle fixtured on the backside So the channel would be facing up, and it would be machined with a conventional end mill. Keyway cut lays the handle down on its face and uses what's essentially a saw blade to cut out the channels like that. And it achieves a far more parallel and more consistent sizing. It's a cheat code. It's so good.
Okay. So it's not that the channel technically is different. It's just how the channel is machined is different.
They do look a little bit different because there has to be a relatively large radius. So I cut my keyways with a 1.5 inch tool. So there is a slight radius near the bottom and at the Zen pin area. Like if you look on my older stuff, you'll see how it's squared at the very bottom.
Oh,
like on the Koenig
V1.
V1.
Yeah. Okay. So
but on the V2s and V3s of most of my newer stuff, you'll see that they're keyway cut, and you can see the radius from it.
Gotcha. So here is my maybe the teal's a little easier to see, but yeah, you can see at least if you're watching this video, you can see the radius that he's mentioning here at the very end where it curls up, and that's, I mean, at least as far as the user goes, I don't think that really affects anything. Albeit, you do have to make sure that your channel is long enough that it doesn't the blade doesn't slap against the curve.
Yeah, so that's the main thing to have to worry about when using keyway cut channels is you either need to have a shorter blade if it's something like a Tonto where the tip is relatively high. It's not as big of a concern with something like a drop point or a Weehawk where the tip is relatively centered, but it is something that you need to think about when designing it.
Okay, that's really cool to know about. So that was the V2 Vortex and the Nemesis. Then
after those, I want to say it was the Ultralight.
Ultralight. How did you come up with the Ultralight?
So the Ultralight was kind of like a passion project of mine. I never truly intended it to be like a competitive flipper or something that fit most people's preferences because I know it doesn't. It is very weird and obscure. But there was one night where I just couldn't sleep. It was like 3 a.m, and I wanted to design the lightest metal Balisong in the world. And so comes the Ultralight.
I think it is still the lightest metal Balisong.
As far as I'm aware, yeah. I don't think anyone really wants to try to beat it. Like, I'm sure it can be beaten, but why would you want to? Like, it's a really fun Balisong, don't get me wrong. It was like
I adore
my
this.
main flipper for over a year. I really thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm super happy with how they came out. But it's just not competitive.
Oh, for sure. I think competitive is somewhat of an arbitrary thing. I know that people who there is BaliComp, which is a real competition. But I know that also, like, I have no personal interest in like competing, and while I do like to learn new tricks, I have kind of at least this point like fallen into a plateau and have become very comfortable with like certain combos and things like that. And to me, the Ultralight it's comical, to be honest. It is so light, but even now, like, also like Balisongs have skewed to be much lighter than like before. Like, I think this is under 3 ounces, but even now, like the Gaboon as a titanium knife is like 3.2 or something. It's like really light as well.
That's kind of crazy. So the Ultralight, it came out to weigh about 2.67 ounces. So it is more or less the weight of a Squiddy, but without the downfalls of being plastic.
And way better balanced, at least compared to the original Squiddy. The Squiddy A, I've not tried the other colors, but the A at least has the nose, which helps balance it out. But the regular Squiddy is so handle biased, and this is without any inserts. It's like kind of neutral, or neutral-ish. I got inserts for the handles from Zippy, and then I actually personally commissioned him to do the blade inserts, which he now sells, to help balance out the handle inserts, because with how light it is, these little plastic inserts that he printed out, it does affect the balance, just because it's just so light already. But I love this Balisong. And so you have the Ultralight, and then I know that the slight stands for the somewhat light. Did
Correct.
You just decide to be like, what if I print this in titanium, or like, what if I export these CAD files for titanium as well? Like,
so they're actually not the same files. They're very similar. The handle shape is the same. The cutouts are the same. The texture is more or less the same. It's a little different because it's not sandblasted the same as aluminum is. But
gotcha.
The handle shape is the same, but the blade stock is different. So the ultralight uses an 1/8 inch blade stock, so 0.125 inches. The slight, to get the balance where I wanted it, I needed to increase the blade stock to 0.135. So the Zen
So
pin geometry changed, but the blades are not cross compatible.
they are longer, or I'm sorry, thicker on the
Yeah,
slight.
the blade thickness
I
is
learned the
increased.
hard way. I wanted to see what it would be like if I swapped blades, but unfortunately, I learned that it doesn't fit.
See, I get that question a lot because I mean they more or less look the same. But personally, I don't even understand why you would want to swap the blades because the balances and the weights are so different. Like the ultralight blade on slight handles would be so incredibly handle biased, and the slight
Listen,
blade on ultralight handles would be a Tachyon 3 basically.
I actually have a TAC 3. It's a latchless TAC 3, and it's pretty neutral in mine. I cannot speak for other TAC 3s, but the I have a Lucha that has all of the tungsten weights in the zippy spacers just so I can make the heaviest Lucha possible. So like
All
just
right.
like and I don't know, there's an account called the Cursed Kraken. His name's Kenji, and he likes to make weird, bizarre hybrid things where he will like put blades and handles from completely different makers and see what they're like. And sometimes he gets some weirdly competent things, and other times it's just garbage. And who's to, it's fun to make garbage.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And these are both two really fun Balisongs. I think I only tried to put the live blade on the ultralight, and I know full well that it was going to be way too heavy, but
Yeah.
I wanted to see what it was like. I don't think I put the trainer on the slight handles. So in my opinion, I think the slight is like it's a really good like mid-range price flipper. I like to say that like while the Kraken, in my opinion at least, the Kraken is like a gold standard, I would argue, in the Balisong community.
Yeah.
Though some people have like shifted opinions. Say what you will of that. But in my opinion, I feel like the Slight and the Sliff T are kind of like two opposite ends of like the price range above that. This one I feel like it's much thinner and I don't know about nimbler. It's definitely thinner and similar-ish weight to the Kraken, and the Slift T I feel like is really long because it's Machinewise, and
Yeah.
it feels thicker in my hands.
So I don't know the size of the handles on the Slift T, like the dimensions of it.
Gotcha.
But the thickness difference that you're feeling might just be because the slight is rounded.
Possibly. It's a really nice design, I guess. You said okay, the douche, the trap code, the outcast, the vortex, the Koenig, the nemesis, the ultralight, and the slide. That's eight designs that you've made, which is a lot more than a lot of makers, arguably. I guess what were some of the things that you learned from your earlier designs that I know you told me a little bit here and there, but like, I guess how did you hone in on your current design philosophy, and what would you say is maybe like a signature of your design philosophy?
So honestly, what my stuff has evolved into now is literally just 7 years of trial and error, trying a bunch of different things, finding out what works, what doesn't, and making improvements based off what I learn. The thing that has kind of stuck with me and like been distinguishable with most of my products is the thicker than or larger than normal handle gap. I've handled a few knives where the handles end up slapping after a couple years, and to me that just kind of ruins a balisong. So I wanted to design all my stuff with beating in mind. I never want the handles to slap ever.
That's fascinating because I never even necessarily thought about your Balisongs having like an extra wide handle gap. Like to me, this feels like pretty normal.
Yeah.
One thing I've also noticed is like the Koenig is square and the Slate is rounded, but they both are like pretty low in terms of the taper from like the pivots to the ends. Is there like a reasoning for that too? Because like that's something that I've noticed across some of your designs as well.
Not inherently. I definitely prefer a little bit more narrow knives. So I didn't want to make anything that was like as fat as like a replicant. That was never my goal.
Yeah, these have beefy handles.
So I do design my knives to fit my preferences before like anything else.
Makes sense. As a composer, I write music I think is cool. And
Oh
if
yeah.
I were to try and write music that I didn't like, that what's the point even at that point?
Yeah. I mean, there is like a certain aspect of it where I need to try and appeal to the mass, so I
Sure,
can
yeah,
make a
of
living.
course.
But there's always going to be some aspects of it that I designed to my liking.
Yeah, that's for sure. Um, if I'm correct, you get these parts manufactured by someone else, right?
Correct.
Was that always the case, like even from the very beginning, and like have things changed between
Um,
like go on?
so I never personally manufactured parts in house. I don't have the mill. I don't have the space for a mill. That was never my goal. Um, Having parts manufactured by other shops is more in line with what I wanted to achieve. If I were to make parts myself, my knives would not be anywhere near as budget as they are. So outsourcing is ideal to keep the price points where I want them to be.
Gotcha. So when you receive the parts, I guess what does that look like for you in terms of when you get everything?
So when I get a batch of parts in, if it's an aluminum model, the handles come pre-anodized. I don't do the anodizing in house. Aluminum anodizing it's a pain in the ass, and I don't want to deal with it. So I let someone that is far more competent take care of that.
It's also dangerous, right? If you don't have like the right equipment.
Yeah, so you actually use sulfuric acid, and I don't want to mess with that personally.
Yeah.
So I let the professionals do that for me. But I received the batch of parts. Every part gets QC inspected before assembly. I set anything aside I don't like. Um, After that, I assemble, tune everything. Blade finishing, it can vary from batch to batch. For the most part, I do a satin finish on my blades, the trainer blades at least. For live blades, I've ended up going with the heavy stonewash on most things.
The stonewash does look really nice. I had a slight before this one that was it was like the gray handles and it was the stonewash blade. It looked really nice. I ended up trading it with cash for I actually got the OSP matrix out of it, which seemed like a crazy deal, and I missed the slight so much. I traded for someone else's Blano and mirror polish blade, but the stonewash blades look really nice. And you stonewash them yourself?
Correct. So all the blades, they are all the live blades anyway, are finished by me. I also do all of the finishing for my titanium models. So when I receive them, they come with a machine finish, which is extremely sharp. It's shiny, it's a nice looking finish, but it's covered in hairline scratches and not comfortable at all to flip. So I
Yeah.
end up refinishing all titanium parts myself before assembly.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's definitely like I know that there's like maybe some people have misconceptions that like if you outsource your parts, you just kind of like get everything, you can just slap it all together. But there's a lot more work that goes into just assembly and tuning, and you have to refinish things. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a process
Yeah, I wish it were as simple as just getting assembled products, but it's not. A lot of work does go into these behind the scenes.
for sure. One thing I'm curious is also like you mentioned you would get parts and you would set aside the ones that you didn't like. I guess like how much scrap do you get in terms of like your orders? Like is it a large percentage or is it just like one or two? Like I'm not sure how much breakage you have to go through.
So it changes from batch to batch. I'd say like a blemished rate is probably about 25% of parts, where
Ooh,
those I'm able to sell as a discount, and scrapped parts, that really just depends on what machinist I get at the shop. So the Koenig V1 was really, really rough. So that order was 300 blades. It was supposed to take about 3 months start to finish. Many, many mistakes were made. The order took about 9 to 10 months for
oh
completion.
boy.
They messed up somewhere around 200 of the 300 blades. So
Wow.
I have a pile of probably 500 scrap parts that are unusable. Thousands and thousands of dollars worth of scrap. It hurts
That's
to look at. It's a graveyard.
is wow. That sounds really hard to sustain.
The fact that it was delayed for about 7 months and I had no income during that time.
Oh,
It
but
was it was a rough year. That was an absolute struggle for me.
so is that why like so mine has the ROTB or Revenge of the Blades uh blade. So is that why you like have did you like reach out to him to make blades because you had all these handles with no blades?
No, so I wanted to do a collab project with hand ground blades because that's something I hadn't done before, and Kyle was nice enough to help me out with that. So I had some
Sweet.
blanks made, and he did some fantastic work with the grinds, and I'm really happy with how they came out.
Yeah,
But
this
it
is
was
a
more a
really
collab. It
nice.
wasn't like a Band-Aid fix.
That's actually really nice to know in the sense that like this was not like and oh shit, what do I do with all these handles kind of, but actually like hey, wouldn't it be cool if we worked together, and something that you were excited to do instead of oh shit, I gotta fix it. That does make me feel more relieved. But wow, that's rough that you had like 60% of your blades were flems or even scrap. I don't even
They
know
weren't
if
blems. They were completely scrapped. Absolutely
complete scrap.
unusable.
How is it unusable? I'm curious.
So the main issue was the bushing hole size. So I use 6.96 millimeter outer diameter bushings. They're custom made for me, and that comes out to about 0.2755 for the bushing hole size in inches. And most of them measured about 285. So we're talking 100 thou oversized.
100. So okay, wow.
I'm sorry, not
How
100 thou, 10 thou. Which
10?
it doesn't sound like a whole hell of a lot, but it completely ruins it.
Yeah, I mean, with your parts being like, it's definitely like a bigger diameter, and you would probably be able to tell if like your bushings just didn't fit.
Yeah,
It would just
it
like
was
fall
rough.
through, I assume.
Yeah.
Oh, and you can't fix that.
Not really. I could have had custom bushing made, but the machining on the bevels was also terrible. It looks like a lot of them were just machined poorly and hand sanded to try and hide it. It was the worst batch of parts I've ever received.
Were you able to get like a partial refund?
No, they fixed some of the parts, sent me the fixed ones, and even a lot of the quote unquote fixed ones were still bad. About
Oh,
50% of the blades in the end ended up getting scrapped. And I decided to
oh,
just cut my losses and move on to the next batch rather than trying to fix something that was already 7 months behind schedule.
yeah. I've also invested in an independent maker who was like getting liners machined,
Okay.
and like the machinist just like got the dimensions wrong, so like, you just can't put scales or like hardware on it. It just doesn't. It's just too big,
Yeah.
and like sometimes that just happens, and like the person I invested in just could not get a refund because it's a small machine shop, and so I'm pretty sure would completely bankrupt them if they were to give a 100% refund. So then they gave a discount for like the next batch, but then also like I am sure you can imagine like you might not necessarily want to go back to the same machinist if they
Yeah.
fucked up a lot of parts. Oh man, that sucks. That sucks. I have definitely gone through periods of like no income, and like I'm a freelancer, and I assume that you're I know that you so I was actually going to ask if you did this full time, but I know now that you work at Machinewise part time, right?
I'd say full time.
Full time.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell
Yes.
me about how that started and what that's looked like in terms of how that's affected NRB as a brand?
So NRB definitely has to be scaled down now. Currently, I am working 3 12-hour shifts at Machinewise during the week. So I work,
Three 12-hour shifts.
yeah.
Holy
So I
shit.
work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, usually about 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. roughly anyway. And then NRB I run on the side. So with putting so many hours into Machinewise, I do have to scale down NRB a good bit. But I do still want to continue making knives on the side. It's just something I want to do. This has always been a hobby of mine that
Hmm.
ended up turning into a career, and I don't want to kill it.
Yeah. So I don't want to necessarily like you don't have to tell me if you don't want, but like I know that Balisong making it's not extremely lucrative and there's a lot of risk. And so was part of why you went to Machinewise for like could like full-time work was, like stability was
100%. Yeah, that was the main reason I reached out to Dalen and asked for a job.
yeah, I know that I think they were hiring too. And so like when they mentioned that you got hired, me and I know a lot of other people were like, "Oh, we know him." Like, "Oh yeah, sure." Like, "Oh, cuz there are a lot of people that get hired and you don't necessarily know them, but it's like, "Oh, he's been making that," and now it's like he's been making that for like 7 years on his own. And so like working with Machinewise, who is one of the few companies that are able to like, grow and be like super, as far as I can tell, like stable, relatively speaking,
Yeah.
as stable as anyone can be in this industry.
Yeah, so I think Dalen is actually currently the second largest Balisong company, only behind Squid. As
Squid,
far as I'm aware, I could be wrong, but he's up there. He's definitely
that
larger than most like independent makers.
that sounds correct. So like it's really interesting in that like you had your own business, or like you still do, which is really great, because I would have been heartbroken if NRB, like, you know, hung up the, I forgot how the saying goes, hung up the whatever. But it's nice to know that you're still doing things. And I guess, like, I heard you say things. I guess what's a little known difficulty about making battle songs, because you've already told me about like the huge loss and delays of like just waiting for machinists, and like not everyone can afford their own machines or has the physical space to have mills and like things for like bead blasting or whatever.
Yeah.
What is a difficulty that you feel like is not super well known in your, at least in your process?
So there's a few different difficulties. The number one thing is I feel like a lot of people don't actually know what goes on behind the scenes and what goes into making a Balisong. I can't just make 10 different designs all at the same time. I simply
God.
don't have the money for that. Like, making Balisongs is not an inexpensive venture. Right now, being a single person running a company, my capital is limited. So I make one model at a time. I use pre-orders to help supplement income
Mhm.
and help pay for that batch because I can't do it on my own. Um, and there's just a lot of variables that go into making it for everything to come out perfect. I have to hope and pray that the shop I'm manufacturing with does not mess up the parts like they did the Koenig, because that's massive delays. So yeah, there's so many variables that need to be perfect to achieve a good final product in a timely manner at a reasonable price. Another difficulty I find is everybody has a different preference. So when I'm designing, I have to design something that I like and I'm proud of, but also fits as many people's preferences as possible to be able to sell.
Part
And
of
that's
why
difficult.
weight systems is really cool is because then you can account for people's preferences.
Absolutely, yeah.
It obviously doesn't like necessarily account for everyone, but a weight system, like I've seen some sandwich designers who like forego weight systems because they feel like, oh, the weight is good, but like preferences, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, I mean that it's really, really hard and expensive and risky to make balisongs, as you said, and working at Machinewise has, I hope, has been really good for you.
Oh, it's phenomenal. Like, I could not have asked for a better job. I am so happy with what I'm doing there.
That's awesome, and I love to hear that. I have to ask, is there anything on the horizon for NRB in the future? Are you working on anything new or bringing back anything old?
So I don't really plan on bringing back anything old. Something
Fair.
I am working on is a titanium Koenig, which
For real?
yes.
For real?
Yes.
Is this confirmed?
Confirmed, yes.
Confirmed! Titanium Koenig. Okay, if you don't know, you might know this. There is a Titanium Koenig group chat that I am in. Unfortunately, after like literally the first day, it devolved, and then there was like this one person who would clog up the chat with lots of things. But like, if for anyone listening to this podcast, there is a meme going around where it's like day X of asking NRB for a titanium Koenig. And people will just, at some point it just became so long. Like, people, I don't know how long people have been asking. Like, what's the longest streak? Do you know?
So the longest streak is Rye, and I believe he is at about day 140.
Oh my gosh.
Let's check real fast.
So yeah,
So yeah,
people have like
yesterday was
random
day
memes.
one. Yesterday was day 140 of Rye asking for titanium Koenig.
Oh my god. So I guess with this podcast release, that is the hard confirm. I feel like I'm out of a professional courtesy. I'm not gonna ask you for when the estimate is unless you have one.
Uh,
But
I,
like, I don't want to rush you.
So I can't do it until the slights are done and gone.
Gotcha.
My goal is to get them into production and finished around June or July.
Oh shit, that's sooner than I thought.
Relatively, yeah. I mean, I'm doing as fast as I can make it, but the orders just take a few months. That's just how it is.
I thought it was like next year.
No, I really want to get these done. Like, I've always wanted to make it. I've just been kind of teasing the people that have been asking for it and giving like as little info as possible.
Oh my god, and tease
Kind
you
of mean,
have.
yeah.
You, oh my god, because like also every time that people ask, he shares it on his story on Instagram, and so like, yeah, Riot at day 140, and people just like, again, it used to be like pictures of like, you know, NRB knives or just battle songs, and now it's just like random fucking shit as like the background for day 100 and blah for asking I am not a real boy for a titanium Koenig.
It's become a combination of pictures of Ryan Gosling and absolutely cursed memes.
Pictures of Ryan Gosling. Why Ryan Gosling? Do you know? Or is it just...
I have no idea. You would have to ask Ryan about that.
Oh my god. Yeah, and it's not just Rye. There
No.
are dozens of people who've been doing this. I did a twist on it. It was like day one of asking I am not a real boy how he is doing. And you're like, fine, or whatever. And then I was like, day one of asking I am not a real boy, are you staying hydrated?
So the main three that have been continuing asking for Ty Koenig are I'm the Tricks, he's at day 120, Rye is at day 140, and Sean Bogard is at day 107.
Oh man. And those are the people who've been doing it the longest, but yeah, there are countless others who have been oh my god. What's so cool is like I got to see some really interesting things from like previous guests, and listen to those videos or watch those videos too, because you get to see them. I am very excited for Titanium Koenig. With that really, really exciting news for all of our the Ty Koenig army, as we have been known as, is there anything that you would like to tell our listeners to depart with?
I don't have anything planned off the top of my head. I'm terrible with words, so you'll want to edit that out, please.
I might not.
Oh wow, okay. I'm hurt. I really just planned to depart with the Ty Koenig news. I figured that would get a few people excited.
That is totally fair and reasonable, and yeah, you heard it here first, I guess. That's really cool and exciting. So with that, thank you so much, Garrett, for joining us on this episode of Balisong Meet the Makers, episode 3. For our viewers, like and subscribe and comment your thoughts. And Garrett, where can people find you and your wares for I Am Not a Real Boy?
So you can find me on Instagram at I Am Not a Real Boy. You can follow my website or check my website anyway at nrbknives.com. But to keep up to date on drops and any news, definitely Instagram.
Great. So thank you so much, and I hope you all enjoyed. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks for having me.